Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Izzy Klein, and I'm a board member and the political chair for the Jewish Democratic Council of America. In Massachusetts' 4th Congressional District, 9 candidates are working tirelessly to be the Democratic nominee and succeed Congressman Joe Kennedy. All 9 were invited to join us this afternoon. While 2 candidates were unable to attend because of scheduling challenges, we are excited to be joined by 7 of the candidates: Khazei, Becky Grossman, Ben Sigel, Dave Cavell, Jake Auchincloss, Mermell, and Dr. Natalia Linos. To our candidates and participants, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. In the nearly 3 years since our founding, JDCA has established itself as the voice of Jewish Democrats, advocating for Jewish and democratic values and electing those who share our values. That's exactly what we did in 2018, when 84% of JDCA endorsed candidates won their race, and we helped to flip 28 seats from red to blue. In 2020, JDCA has already endorsed nearly 90 candidates and will continue to add to that list with the goal of increasing Democrats' House majority, taking control of the Senate, and electing Joe Biden in just 99 days in the most important election of our lives. As we look to the general election, let us not forget about the primaries, the topic of today's forum, which are critically important in this race and only 35 days away. We thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we invite you to listen carefully tonight. Pick your candidate, and at the conclusion of this evening's programs, reach out to that candidate with an offer for help with their campaign in whatever way that you are able. These are critically important times, and I know you all will agree that our country depends on the leadership that these candidates are offering us. I will now turn it over to JDCA and Massachusetts 4 resident Jake Auchincloss, who will tell us more about the critical importance of this district to Jewish Democrats and introduce this evening's moderator, Haley Soifer.
Thank you, Izzy. My name is Jake Auchincloss, and I'm a JDCA summer intern and a lifelong resident of the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. The Massachusetts 4th, my home district, has historically been one of great importance to the Jewish community. Before Congressman Joe Kennedy was elected in 2013, the district was represented by Representative Barney Frank for over 30 years, a groundbreaking member of Congress and dear friend to the Jewish community. In 1987, Congressman Frank became the first openly gay member of Congress, and later the first member of Congress to marry their same-sex partner. As chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Barney Frank was instrumental in passing the 2010 financial reform bill known as Dodd-Frank. In addition to his work on financial reform, Representative Frank was a champion of the fight for justice, one that included civil rights, stronger environmental laws, increasing the supply of low-income housing, and opposing discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Congressman Frank was a dear friend to the Jewish community, an outspoken champion against xenophobia and anti-Semitism, and a strong supporter of Israel. As an active member of the Jewish community in this district, I know how important this election will be, and I hope my fellow Bay Staters will carefully listen to all 7 candidates, and of course, vote on or before the September 1st primary. I also hope all 7 candidates will carefully listen to each other today and not engage in back and forth or engage disparaging comments about each other. JDCA is thrilled to host this forum, but importantly, it's not a debate. Each question will be directed to all 7 of you, and your answers should be directed at the audience, not each other. With that, I am very happy to introduce JDCA's Executive Director, Haley Soifer, who will moderate today's forum. Prior to her work for JDCA, Haley worked for 4 members of Congress, including 3 senators, such as Kamala Harris and Chris Coons, and on campaigns, including the Obama 2008 presidential campaign, when she was the Florida Jewish Vote Director. Haley also served as the Senior Policy Advisor to U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power, during the Obama administration. For the past 2 years, Haley has led JDCA as Executive Director, and I'm thrilled she will be serving tonight as our moderator. Over to you, Haley.
Thank you, Izzy and Jake. I'm thrilled to moderate this panel and even more thrilled to see so many great candidates running in this race. With the overwhelming number of candidates, we certainly will need some rules to ensure this is controlled and equitable, which I will now review. The first rule is that candidates will have 2 minutes for their introductory remarks. We will then ask the candidates to answer questions. We will ask 4 questions drafted by JDCA and follow up with audience questions. We encourage you to submit your questions in the chat or to info@jewishdems.org. All questions should be directed to all 7 candidates. Candidates will have 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer each question. At the end of your 1 minute and 30-second mark, candidates will alter the order in which they answer the questions. There will be no rebuttals, and as Jake mentioned, please do not direct your comments or answers at other candidates. Please remember, you are always addressing the audience. And last, we will end with 1 minute closing statements from each of our 7 candidates. When your time is up, you will see a sign from our staff, and with that sign, we kindly ask that you complete your sentence. We will enforce the time rules strictly. Without further ado, we will turn it over to our 7 candidates for their opening statements. We will proceed in alphabetical order by first name, starting with Alan, followed by Becky, Ben, Dave, Jake, Jesse, and Natalia. So with that, we will start with Alan. Over to you.
Thank you, Haley, Izzy, and Jake, and thank you everyone who is joining us today for this forum. I'm delighted to be with you. My name is Alan Khazei. I'm the co-founder of City Year. I'm also the father of Mermell, who's 18, who just graduated from Brookline High School, and Reese, who's 12, who just finished 6th grade in the Lincoln School. I'm very excited to be with you. I am a staunch supporter of Israel. I had a chance to travel to Israel in May of 1996 with my wife, Vanessa Kirsch, whose father is Jewish. We were hosted by Dorothy and David Harmon. Dorothy, among her many distinctions, was the president of the Shimon Peres Foundation. I will never forget that trip, traveling to the Golan Heights and understanding the security issues, climbing Masada, walking through the old city where for over 1,000 years, Christians, Muslims, and Jews had lived peacefully together. It inspired me to understand the importance of the security for Israel and also its critical role as a democratic ally. I was also inspired by the commitment to national service. As I mentioned, I started City Year. I did that with my college roommate, Michael Brown, because we believed 30 years ago when we started that we had to do things in a different way. We were concerned about poverty, public education, the environment. And so we said, let's rally young people from all different backgrounds. Let's build a model that can inspire a national service program in America like the one in Israel. I had the privilege of working closely with Senator Kennedy, President Clinton, and President Obama. My role was to build the coalitions to help pass 3 major pieces of federal legislation. When Tom DeLay, the Mitch McConnell of his day, tried to defeat the AmeriCorps program and kill it in 2003, I organized the coalition to beat him. When Mitch McConnell opposed the Kennedy Serve America Act in the first 100 days of the Obama administration, I organized the coalition that beat him. We got a majority of the Republican senators to vote for it, as well as all the Democrats. I know how Washington works. I believe that I can build coalitions, including to strongly support Israel and bring about a peaceful solution in the Middle East. It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Becky.
Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. I'm Becky Grossman, and I'm a Newton City Councilor, but the job that I cherish most in my life is being a mom to my 2 kids, Madeline, who's 9, and Jack, who just turned 6 and just finished kindergarten. I'm running for Congress with the fierce urgency of a mom, fed up by what is going on in this country and determined to make change. In my son Jack's first week of kindergarten, I had to do what so many parents around the country are doing in struggling to find the words to explain to him what it would mean to run in a zigzag pattern or find a quiet place to hide in his classroom if a shooter were to show up there. That is not a conversation that any parent should ever have to have with their child, or a fear that any parent should ever have to live with. Throughout this year, both of my kids attended religious school at Temple Emmanuel here in Newton together every Sunday. And every Sunday, there were 2 guards, one at each entrance to the synagogue, reminding me that maybe it's not so safe if they're there. And that is not a fear that we should be living with. I was raised in a conservative Jewish household. I'm proud that my husband, Ben, and I are raising our kids in a loving Jewish household. And throughout my life, my Jewish upbringing imparted upon me the importance of tikkun olam and how each of us has a responsibility to repair the world. That is why I'm in this race. I'm in this race to protect and safeguard the long-term best interests of our kids, the generations to come, and our world. Really look forward to discussing the issues with you this afternoon, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you. Ben.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the Jewish Democratic Council of America for hosting tonight's event. Look, we're at a Hineni moment, that here I am, but the I is a collective I. We are seeing more division in our country than we've ever seen before. We are seeing the inequality gap widen more than ever before. But this is the time when we need to come together as a community, because we are so much stronger when we are united than we are divided. We need a leader who's a bridge builder, a connector, and a unifier. We need a leader who understands the diverse perspectives of their community. We need a leader who isn't just conveniently a Democrat for this election, or isn't conveniently just talking about diversity for this election, but who's been advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion for a long time. We also need to make sure we have a leader who isn't just being pro-Israel and Jewish because of this election, but someone who's been working in the trenches alongside the Jewish community for years. I am that person, and I am that leader. Over the last 20 years, I've done more to support, protect, and strengthen the Jewish community in this country and worldwide than all the other candidates combined. I have helped to foster collaborative relationships between the Jewish community and our non-Jewish communities, especially the Latino and Muslim communities. I've worked to strengthen the US and Israel relationship because it's in the best interest of the United States. And I've worked to defend Israel's place in this world by meeting with over 100 different members of Congress and diplomats from around the world in order to designate Hezbollah as a terrorist organization, fight BDS, finalize a definition of anti-Semitism worldwide, and hold accountable Iran and sanction it. With Nita Lowey and Elliot Engel and some of our most progressive pro-Israel Democrats leaving, it's now more than ever that we elect the most progressive pro-Israel candidate that we can. And I believe I am that person. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave.
Well, thank you, Haley, and thank you, JCDA, and everybody for joining us. I'm Dave Cavell, proud Jewish American from Brookline, and look, I've also lost relatives in the Holocaust. I've visited friends and family in Israel many times. My grandfather immigrated from Poland, speaking only Yiddish. My father was a renowned philosopher who went to Mississippi for the Freedom Summer in 1964 and lived long enough so that I could introduce him to President Obama in the White House. I grew up attending Temple Israel, the largest Reform synagogue in New England, a place where Dr. King once spoke. And today, the two senior rabbis endorsed my campaign. They hosted an event called Cavelling for Cavell. And I'm proud of that endorsement because they and my parents helped introduce me to Tikkun Olam, understanding each of us must help repair the world. So why should you support me instead of these other good people? Well, I'm the one who doesn't just want to have this job. I'm ready to do it. This organization was founded after President Trump's horrifying response to the Charlottesville Unite the Right March and the rise of anti-Semitism in America. I'm the one in this race that has sued the Trump administration 50 times when I was senior advisor to Attorney General Maura Healey on the family separation policy, environmental regulations, you name it. 2 weeks before I was suing the Trump White House, I was working in the Obama White House as a presidential speechwriter and was there when we were hammering out the Paris Climate Accords and working on the Iran nuclear deal and working on the Cuba negotiations and everything else we did in that history-making administration. I've spent 15 years in public service, putting Jewish progressive values into action. I started out teaching 4th grade in the South Bronx. I had students who were homeless and food insecure. They didn't eat meals between the time they left school and came back the next morning. That's why I went into public service. That's why I worked for Governor Patrick, for the Obamas, and for Maura Healey, and that's why I'm running for Congress. I think we need a proven progressive, somebody who can be a national leader, views every issue intersectionally, and recognizes that Black Lives Matter. That's why I have a J Street pre-endorsement. That's why John Favreau and Ben Rhodes support this campaign. I look forward to a great conversation.
Thank you. Jake.
Thanks to JDCA for having all of us. I'm Jake Auchincloss, city councilor in Newton, Marine veteran, recently a new dad. You wouldn't know it from my surname, but I was bar mitzvahed in Newton and grew up in the Jewish tradition. My great-grandparents, the Glimshers, emigrated from Russia, fleeing the pogroms before World War I. Their son, my grandfather, Melvin, walked into a Marine recruiting office in 1942. A 17-year-old, poor, skinny Jewish kid tried to enlist. At that time, the Marines were losing the war in the South Pacific and the horrors of the Holocaust were in full force. But the US government sent that poor Jewish kid to college to study engineering, turned his life around, allowed him to achieve the American dream. That is just one story of a multitude. That is the success of the Jewish American community. But under Donald Trump, we have seen anti-Semitism rear its head yet again. And we must stand up to his dangerous, hateful agenda. And we must also oppose BDS, which is anti-peace and anti-Israel. And not every candidate on this stage can say that. We must support the US-Israel strategic partnership as we strive towards a lasting and just two-state solution. I was a Marine officer in Afghanistan. I know that Israel lives in a dangerous neighborhood and they need military support to remain secure. And finally, we must support the US-Israel economic relationship. I worked in cybersecurity for a number of years. I know that Israel is a leader in that sector and many others. Economic and technical exchange between Israel and the United States, Israel and Massachusetts, drives forward both economies. I'm going to be a champion for the US-Israel relationship and for the Jewish community as a member of Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. Jesse.
Sorry, trouble with the mute button. Thank you so much to JDCA for having me. My name is Jessie Mermell, and I'm running for Congress to take on Donald Trump and his minions, fight for Medicare for all and reproductive justice, and lead an equitable recovery to COVID-19. Now, this is a crowded field, but the people of the 4th Congressional District deserve a Congresswoman who can deliver on the progressive leadership necessary to lift up working families in this district. And I've built a 20-year career here in Massachusetts doing just that. From serving on the leadership team at Planned Parenthood to working side by side with Governor Deval Patrick as part of his senior staff, being on the front lines of municipal government as a select board member in Brookline, or spending the past 5 years running the Progressive Business Organization in Massachusetts. There are real differences in this race. I'm one of very few candidates who have consistently supported the progressive policies that we need to move the 4th District forward. Medicare for all, free public college tuition and technical school tuition, student debt relief, and defunding the police. I've led this field on transparency, releasing 6 years of my tax returns, because frankly, we have to run the type of campaign that Donald Trump would never run, one that's transparent and accountable. And I'm the only progressive in this race who has built a broad, diverse grassroots coalition, one that includes former First Lady Diane Patrick, SEIU, the Coalition for Social Justice, Mass Nurses Association, Mass Teachers Association, and so many more. We are a people-powered campaign, not taking money from corporate PACs or the fossil fuel industry, and not fueled by personal wealth. The reason I'm running a people-powered campaign, the reason my career has been devoted to social justice is because of my family. I'm the daughter of a Jewish father and a Catholic mother, and spent most of my childhood in closest proximity with my Jewish family, and their values is what have inspired my work in social justice throughout my career. I'm proud to be with you this afternoon. I hope to have the opportunity to prove to you that I'm the candidate in this race with the experience, the vision, and the team to lead in the 4th Congressional District.
Thank you. Natalia.
Thank you so much for having me today, and it's a pleasure to join you. My name is Dr. Natalia Linos. I'm an epidemiologist, a mom of 3 little kids, Amalia, Alexandra, and Leonidas, and we live in Brookline. I am the one candidate that entered this race because of COVID. I entered in response to the fact that this administration failed Americans. We have 140,000 Americans who have lost their lives, over 70,000 every day. And in the last 4 days, 1,000 Americans are dying every day. This has been a disaster, and I stepped in because I have the unique skill set for this unique moment. As a public health expert, as someone who has spent the last decade at the United Nations working on global health, but also the alliances that are important to move us forward on other issues like climate change, I have the 2 skills that you need, someone with global experience and public health for this moment. But I want to share a little bit about who I am and where I come from, because it's been such a pleasure hearing from all the other candidates. I'm a Greek American. My parents were international students here, so I was born in Cleveland, but when I was 1 month old, we moved back to Greece, and I was raised there in a very religious Greek Orthodox household, go to church every Sunday and Lent and fasting, and, really understanding a lot of what it means to be, in a religious home. My grandfather was a refugee from Turkey. There was a big expulsion in the early 1920s. And I have married an Arab American. I'm the only one in this panel probably who is married to a Palestinian. My husband is Palestinian American, and our kids go to Temple Israel for daycare. And that was an intentional choice. I know that raising children in Brookline who are Arab American, they need to have deep friendships, a deep understanding of Israeli history as well as Judaism. And that was a choice. And I hope in this, this conversation today, you can see how I have chosen to put myself in situations that are a little different and to share with you my background too. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you all. We appreciate the opening statements. We will now move into questions. We will start with 4 questions drafted by JDCA. And for those watching, please do send your questions for all 7 candidates to info@jewishdems.org, or you can post them in the chat. Our first question is regarding COVID-19 and healthcare. Amid the largest public health crisis of our lifetimes and the widening of economic disparities in the United States, Republicans, including Donald Trump, continue to attempt to chip away at the protections in the Affordable Care Act. If elected to Congress, what steps would you take to protect Americans' right to accessible and affordable health care? Because Alan gave his opening statement first, Becky, will start with you, followed by Ben, Dave, Jake, Jesse, Natalia, and then Alan. So over to you, Becky.
Thank you. I believe that healthcare is a human right and should be guaranteed for everyone. And the Trump administration's attacks on the Affordable Care Act have been absolutely unconscionable. Over the past few years, I've seen firsthand how much is wrong with the current system as my parents try to navigate our incredibly fragmented and costly healthcare system to obtain very expensive medications that my mom needs to treat a rare autoimmune condition. She was diagnosed with this rare autoimmune condition, having been healthy and active and vibrant one day and incredibly sick the next. My underlying value here is to get as many people covered with quality healthcare as quickly and affordably as possible. And I think that starting with the public option as we move in the direction of Medicare for all is the best way to do that. I mentioned my mom's experience and thousands of dollars a year in prescription drug costs. We also need to tackle the unconscionable price of prescription drugs in this country and take on big pharma, which means capping out-of-pocket costs, allowing the federal government to negotiate drug prices, and allowing the safe importation of drugs from trusted trading partners. This is something that I feel really passionately and personally about, having been in and out of more hospitals than I care to count over the last 4 years. And we have seen firsthand how the disproportionate access to healthcare in this country has played out especially disproportionately in communities of color, and how COVID-19 has affected 2 to 3 times in communities of color as opposed to in white families. That is not okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben.
Thank you so much. Look, I truly believe that we need universal access to high quality, affordable healthcare for all, including all of our undocumented immigrants. Because when one person doesn't have healthcare coverage, they put themselves and their family in danger and everyone else. So one of the first things that I would do is pass paid family and medical leave for everyone. As a father of 4 young kids and a wife who also works, who for 2 of those kids worked in the federal government and didn't get 1 day of paid family and medical leave, that is so personal and important to me. We need to make sure everyone doesn't have to choose between spreading COVID-19 and putting food at the table. Number two that I would fight for immediately is to make sure that we as a federal government can negotiate prescription drug prices under Medicare. Right now, we're not allowed to do that. If we do that, we can save over $500 billion in a decade. Now, I am someone who believes right now we need to strengthen the ACA as it was originally intended before Republicans try to rip it apart over 30 different times. We need to add a public option, and we need to expand Medicare from 65 down to 50. We know that our healthcare system has systematic and systemic racism in it, and we need to make sure that everyone has that opportunity, that Black and brown community members are contracting at twice the rate as their population, and they're getting tested less, they're getting treated less, and they're getting less personal protection equipment. So let's handle all these things all at once.
Thank you. Dave.
Well, I believe healthcare is a human right, and I support Medicare for all. That's why I was the first candidate to endorse a presidential candidate, and I endorsed Elizabeth Warren. Look, we talk about the costs of moving to a new system, but look at the costs of not. Millions of Americans have lost not just their jobs during this pandemic, but their healthcare. We have a sick care system, not a wellness system. This entire pandemic, though, has been tragically mismanaged from the start. I worked with that pandemic response team in the Obama White House that President Trump decided to disband. So the first thing we need to do is fire President Trump, fire Mitch McConnell, and get this country back on the right track. And I'm the one here that has actually worked on implementing the ACA when I was in the Obama White House and protecting the entire Affordable Care Act in federal court when I was in the Attorney General's office. So I think we need to do short and long-term things here. You know, they're all intersectional that recognize that immigrant communities and minority communities and women-owned small businesses and workers have been hardest hit during this pandemic, and they need to be where we center our relief efforts. So short-term, let's extend all those unemployment benefits and, you know, fully fund schools and work on the social determinants of health. And then long-term, let's pass Medicare for all. Let's pass paid family and medical leave. Let's pass a Green New Deal and save our democracy. How we talk about these issues matters. If you said, do you support Obamacare? Only about 40% of Americans would say yes. If you said, do you support preventing people with pre-existing conditions from going bankrupt? 85% say yes. I'm ready for that.
Thank you. Jake.
The healthcare issue is a personal issue for me. Grew up in a healthcare family. My brother is on the front lines of COVID rapid response at MGH. And my dad is Tony Fauci's #2 in Washington, D.C. And Massachusetts versus Washington, D.C. tells you all you need to know about the impact of leadership on COVID response. Donald Trump's gross incompetence has cost lives, whereas Charlie Baker's expertise-driven response, where he listened to scientists, has saved lives and helped Massachusetts be one of the most successful states in the union. One of the reasons I supported Charlie Baker for governor. Now, as we look to get a new healthcare bill across the finish line, 3 principles are going to guide me, informed by my experience and growing up in a healthcare family. First, healthcare is a human right. It's not a job perk. Being sick is scary enough without having to worry about going bankrupt because of it. Number 2, women must control their own reproductive decisions. That means funding Title X and Planned Parenthood and ending the global gag rule. And then number 3, investing in basic medical research and in the teaching hospitals that advance clinical care is the best way that we cure patients and an important way that we drive the Massachusetts economy forward. The best way we can achieve those 3 principles is by building on the promise and potential of Obamacare, which has never had a chance to fully realize what it can do. We need to add a public option, strengthen the individual mandate, and finally let the Affordable Care Act do what it was meant to do, ensure all Americans with affordable health care coverage.
Thank you, Jesse.
You know, I've worked for 2 direct service healthcare providers, Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts, and I ran the Mass Association for the Blind, providing in-home services to keep our blind and visually impaired seniors safe at home. And we've been through our own health struggles in my family. My father is on year 16 of a battle, and I do mean battle, with prostate cancer. It's why I support Medicare for all. I know that this is our best chance to finally create a system that people can access and afford, to control prescription drug costs, and to address the broad range of healthcare concerns, disability coverage, mental health, dental, that we are leaving out of the equation right now. It's costing us $3.5 trillion to not do anything. That's without factoring in COVID. We know that number is only going to grow. I'm incredibly proud to be endorsed in this race by frontline workers in the healthcare emergency, folks like the Mass Nurses Association and SEIU. I'm looking forward to working in partnership with our frontline workers in healthcare to finally create a healthcare system that treats healthcare as a human right, that allows people to live in dignity and not have to lay awake at night wondering whether or not they can afford the care that they need to keep themselves and their families safe.
Thank you. Natalia.
Thanks, Haley. On March 2nd, when we only had one death in the US from COVID, I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post with the former health commissioner of New York City, Mary Bassett, around the fact that we were warning that our country could have the worst epidemic among any other wealthy country. That's despite the fact that we have the best doctors, the best nurses, the best hospitals. We spend the most on healthcare than any wealthy country. And it was because of the root causes: inequities in our country, racism, and this administration that has scapegoated science, that has attacked scientists, public health, has defunded our public health institutions, and anti-immigrant sentiment. I entered this race a few months after that because I kept on pushing and advocating. I joined the Poor People's Campaign, trying to bring more attention to the health inequities around COVID, and hearing nothing and seeing public health officials being attacked. You know, many have had death threats, and you know, it is absolutely a preventable issue. And we have failed Americans. So I believe in Medicare for all. I believe that the conversation is now. We have this tragedy as an opportunity to talk about health and human rights and act on it. I believe that nurses and doctors and public health officials want people with my skills, and that's why I've been endorsed by 150 of them, more coming. But I believe that we need skills, and we need to understand that healthcare is not what shapes health. It is our communities, it is our neighborhood, it is everything around us. So health care is important, but so is health. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alan.
Healthcare is personal for me as well. I grew up in a healthcare family. My mother was a nurse. She was a nurse anesthetist, a school nurse, and a youth development nurse. My father was a surgeon, a general surgeon, a vascular surgeon, and an oncologist. My dad had the Affordable Care Act in his office long before it was federal policy. When you walked into Dr. Khazei's office, the first question was, do you have insurance or how are you going to pay? It was, why aren't you feeling well? He treated patients whether they could pay him or not. I had my own direct personal experience with the need for healthcare for everyone. When my daughter was born, on day 3, we were informed that she had a serious heart defect. She had to have emergency heart surgery at 6 weeks of age. Thankfully, we had good healthcare and we had access to Children's Hospital. And then again, when my daughter was 13, she started to faint. And we rushed her to Children's Hospital. And thanks to an Israeli doctor who invented using MRIs of the heart, we discovered that she had a leaky valve and she had to have a second emergency surgery. So I understand why everyone has to have health care. When we started City Year, we made sure that all of our corps members had health care premium free. And because we were the model for AmeriCorps, we were able to fight and include health care for every single AmeriCorps member. 10 years ago, I said we should have a strong public option. I agree with that today. We need to be able to negotiate prescription drug costs. Most of all, we need to recognize this pandemic. We have to move beyond just the idea of personal health insurance to much more greater commitment to public health and how we're all in this together. I will be a strong champion for making sure that everyone is covered, everybody has access to affordable health care as a human right. Thank you.
Thank you all. We will now move to our second question on racial justice and police reform. We at JDCA are committed to ending systemic racism. We know the words Black Lives Matter are not enough, and we are committed to ensuring the federal government takes meaningful action to bring about justice in policing and elsewhere in society. If elected, what would you do to fight for racial justice and police reform, including in this district? We will start with Ben, followed by Dave, Jake, Jesse, Natalia, Alan, and Becky. Ben.
Thank you so much. As the only candidate from day one who had on their platform combating hatred, bigotry, anti-Semitism, racism, and Islamophobia, and all forms against all people, this has been personal. I have produced a whole roadmap on how we eliminate racism in this country. It starts with condemning and eliminating police brutality, racial profiling, and excessive use of force. We need to create national certifications and decertifications for our police. We need to eliminate police qualified immunity so that if one police officer, and God forbid a whole department, were to violate someone's civil rights, they'll be held accountable. We need to demilitarize our police, and we need to reallocate some of the resources to our education and youth engagement. But if we only do that, we will not solve the underlying issues of racism. We need to eradicate racism in our healthcare system, education system, housing and transportation, and in our environment. And even there, if we don't do that, I think there's still 4 truly underlying reasons for racism. Number 1, no one's born a bigot or a racist. We teach that in our society. So we need to unteach that and teach our youth at the earliest ages that lies, stereotypes, and prejudice can turn into hate and worse. Number 2, we need to elect diverse leaders who understand the diverse perspectives of their community. Number 3, we need to support and protect the voting rights of all Americans. And number 4, we need to make sure we're not undercounted in the census, the largest, most inclusive civil activity in this entire country, where Latinos and Blacks and Native Americans and children are the most undercounted populations.
Thank you. Dave.
Black Lives Matter. And we haven't acted like that in this country for 400 years. By the way, 15% or more of Jews identify as people of colors. Their lives matter too. So look, especially as a white man, I believe I need to be an active anti-racist and work to lift up diverse voices. I believe my former boss, President Obama, was right when he said we have to pair our protests that I've been at with our actions in elections and the policies that we support. So to start with, I've called for reimagining policing, banning chokeholds, ending militarization and qualified immunity, reallocating more money. Republicans have been defunding schools and social services and calling that tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. Let's fix that. More generally, this is why I support reimagining this whole country to be one that is free of systemic racism, ending redlining and affordable housing, addressing environmental racism, and I've proposed an idea called the George Floyd Education Act. It is time for us to teach our real history in this country, and that means Black history as well. I call for bringing together Facing History in Ourselves, the NAACP, and others to figure out what we teach and how we teach it. But let's be clear, the reasons that Jewish communities are under attack and that our congregations are afraid every Shabbat is related to the reasons that Muslims are afraid to worship in mosques and that Black Americans are not safe birdwatching or jogging or living their lives. White supremacy and hatred in all of its forms is our common enemy, so let's fight it together.
Jake.
Like Dave said, speeches are not enough. We need action. And I'm the person in this race who has walked the walk. As a city councilor in Newton, I took tough votes to build more housing in a city marred by a legacy of exclusionary zoning so we could be more welcoming, more inclusive, and more diverse. I helped quarterback our independent police reform task force. And for these reasons, I have the strong support from my friends and colleagues in the housing and civil rights movements. I've also put forward a roadmap for how we can demilitarize our police and get out of a 20-year mindset where we have asked our military to police people overseas while asking our police to overly militarize themselves and make our public places unsafe for everybody. In Congress, I will recognize that racial justice is an intersectional issue. We have to promote early education, the first position I ever took when I first ran for the city council. We have to expand the earned income tax credit. We have to adopt an Elizabeth Warren-like housing bill that truly makes every city more inclusionary. And we have to pass a new Voting Rights Act so that everybody has the access to the ballot box that will ensure that their elected officials represent them.
Jesse.
I'm proud to be one of just a few people in this race who have signed the Newton Defund the Police pledge, something spearheaded by some remarkable student activists in that city. Listen, we have to state loud and clear that Black Lives Matter, and then we have to back it up with action. So yes, we need to defund the police, but I look at that as investing in public safety. Right? A police officer showing up at your door with a gun isn't the only way to keep a community safe. And in fact, in many cases, it is counterintuitive as a way to keep things safe. We need to invest in schools, in parks and open space, in transportation, in healthcare, in housing. Take money from police and put it toward the broader definition of what keeps our community safe. And there's some real actions we need to see coming out of Washington. We need to ban chokeholds and tear gas. We need to make it a crime to not deliver medical care to anyone in custody. We need a Justice Department that will hold law enforcement officials and departments accountable when they violate human rights, when they violate civil rights and engage in police abuse. There are many things that need to be happening at the federal level around policing and the criminal legal system. But I understand that it will be my job as a member of Congress to look at every single piece of legislation that crosses my desk through the lens of racial justice. Is it a piece of housing legislation? Racial justice. An education bill? Racial justice. Transportation? That's racial justice too. And particularly as a white woman from a community of pretty significant privilege in Brookline, it'll often be my job to lead from behind and to turn from our brothers and sisters in communities of color and ask how I can be best an ally to them.
Natalia.
I've worked on the issue of racism and health for many, many years. At the New York City Health Department, when I was science advisor to the commissioner, we changed the entire narrative for New York City from one of income inequality in health to really call out racism. We were seeing rates of maternal mortality 3 to 4 times higher for Black moms, rates of infant mortality, but even the more usual diseases, cardiovascular disease, diabetes. Black New Yorkers were dying at earlier and younger ages and in ways that are preventable. So I have always been vocal around racism being a public health emergency. It is something that I have worked on for many, many years. On the police front, currently I lead the Center at Harvard for Health and Human Rights, and we are looking at police force and violence. And one of the big challenges is that we don't have data. The federal government does not collect data on police-involved killings or injuries. That is something we can change on day one. We also need to do something fundamentally around our history. This is a country with a legacy of 400 years of slavery, Jim Crow. It is a country where the federal government instituted racist policies around redlining and Social Security, excluding agriculture workers. So no wonder we have such a deep divide in terms of wealth, and structural racism is alive everywhere. I believe in reparations. I believe that we have to have that conversation now. And I am so hopeful that this movement around George Floyd's murder is the opportunity to move us forward, to bring racial justice today to all Americans. Thank you.
Alan.
Thank you so much, JDCA, for asking this question and prioritizing it in your agenda. Promoting racial justice and racial healing has been the cause of my life. Michael Brown and I started City Year in Boston to show that national service could be the meeting place to build common ground and complete the civil rights movement. We were the first national service program ever to unite young people from all backgrounds, from Roxbury, from Dorchester, from Jamaica Plain, but also Southie and Chelsea and Brookline and Newton and Wellesley. We wanted to show, because of Boston's history of racial strife, going back to the 70s with busing, that if we can make it work in Boston, we can make it work anywhere. And we were the model for AmeriCorps. And now 1.1 million people have done AmeriCorps, and guess what? 93% of them report that after a year in AmeriCorps, they feel like they have more diverse friends that they will maintain for their lives. 80% say if given a problem, they could solve it, and they would recruit a diverse group to work with them to do it. When I went to Israel, I saw that the National Service Program brought the diversity of Israel together and built a more united country. After the horrible killing of George Floyd, I partnered with Cornell Brooks, former head of the NAACP and a good friend of mine, to propose an American Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission. We have an extraordinary awakening happening in this country. I've served on 2 congressional commissions. We propose that there be a congressionally chartered commission with $50 million to make sure that the energy from our streets gets into a federal process that leads to criminal justice reform, economic justice reform, public education reform, public health reform. This will be a centerpiece of my agenda if I'm elected. Thank you.
Thank you. Becky.
The systemic racism in this country is real. It's real in my home community of Newton. It's real in every city and town in this district throughout our nation. I believe strongly that Black Lives Matter and that we need to tackle this head on in every institution and system in our country. That starts with reimagining policing and thinking about how we're going to reallocate resources to the mental health and social services that we know are so badly needed, and thinking about what a public safety system is that makes people actually safe and also feel safe. Then we have to acknowledge that we have to go system by system, whether we're talking about healthcare, and the disproportionate access to healthcare in this country, how that has affected communities of color. And we can see that front and center in this COVID emergency. When we're talking about housing and the effects of redlining that continue to impact and define what our communities look like today. Whether we're talking about education and access to quality and affordable childcare, which also is an issue of deep inequity. We've got to look system by system by system, and that work is incredibly important in tackling this systemic racism, which we know is real.
Thank you. We will now turn to our third question. This one will be on anti-Semitism. In the past year, we have seen a record number of anti-Semitic attacks and incidents across the United States, including those perpetrated by white nationalists. If elected, what measures would you take to combat the rise of violent anti-Semitism and the emboldening of white nationalism in which Donald Trump himself has played a role? Dave will begin, followed by Jake, Jesse, Natalia, Alan, Becky, and Ben. Dave.
Well, as I said, this is the history and part of your organization, so I'm going to work with you. I've seen anti-Semitism. I saw it when swastikas were spray painted on my synagogue as a child, when classmates would ask me where my horns were. This has always been with us, but you're right. It's been supercharged during the Trump administration, and cemeteries have been vandalized. Jews have been murdered in synagogues and homes. And yeah, the president initially refused to condemn those participating in a neo-Nazi march. I've helped to work to respond. I've been involved with ADL in the Attorney General's office. I helped promote our hate crimes hotline that was launched after the 2016 election to collect and report on these incidents and get people the services they needed. And I served as a liaison to the Jewish communities around Massachusetts during this terrible era. I think we need national leaders in Congress who know how to stand up on this issue and fight back. So for me, that work starts by fully funding the nonprofit security grant program that helps synagogues with security and programming. I also think we need to pass the Khalid Gibran and Heather Heyer No Hate Act. This is critical. Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut introduced that. We need to work with Jewish organizations and nonprofits across the country to fight back against anti-Semitism and identify domestic terrorist organizations. You know, we need to recognize that strong gun laws save lives and ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And again, the George Floyd Education Act here, I think, is one of our best strategies to fight back against the roots of hatred, bigotry, and white supremacy.
Jesse.
Is it Jake?
I think I'm first.
Jake.
Thank you. So as you alluded to in the question, leadership really, really matters. Donald Trump has established a dangerous, hateful agenda for this country, and it has suffused our body politic. The number one thing we can do is get rid of the worst president in American history. I called for his impeachment 3 years ago on the floor of the Newton City Council. Things have only gotten worse since then, and it needs to be all hands on deck, regardless of who wins this primary, frankly, on September 2nd, to make sure that we do everything we can to unseat this president. Now, even with better leadership from a President Biden, we're going to need to take immediate action to ensure the safety of the Jewish community. I was the first candidate in this race to put forward a comprehensive gun safety program. I'm a former Marine Special Operations officer. I slept, ate, trained, patrolled with an AR-15 for 4.5 years. I know that no civilian needs to own one. I know that no matter how much you dress up in body armor and go parading around state houses, it doesn't mean that you need to have high capacity magazines. And we need to pass comprehensive laws that have universal background checks, ban assault weapons, and take guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. Because we know, unfortunately, in this country, that when angry, hate-filled people get weapons, they too often use it on minority groups, Jews included.
Thank you. We'll now turn to Jesse.
Well, unfortunately, as you might imagine, as the daughter of a Jewish father growing up in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, I am no stranger to anti-Semitism. And it has been sickening to see it on the rise here in this country, and to see it on the rise because of a president who fans the flames of hate and does it openly. He says the quiet parts out loud and does it without shame. There are real things that we need to do in Congress to make sure that we are standing up to hate in all of its forms, and particularly to anti-Semitism. We do need to fully fund and increase funding for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program. We also need to make sure that we're exploring how we fully implement the Never Again Education Act, which I know made it through the House and Senate, and I believe was signed into law this year, that would allow the Holocaust Museum to work with school districts and schools to engage in education, so that young people understand from the earliest ages the history of anti-Semitism and don't fall prey to it as they become adults. And we do need to work with Jewish organizations around the country. I'm proud to serve as community representative on the council at JCRC, an organization that does incredible work along with so many others in this area to make sure that they are leading the way and we are their partners in fighting anti-Semitism and hate in all of its forms.
Thank you, Natalia.
Thank you so much for that question. And growing up in Greece, you know, anti-Semitism wasn't something that we spoke a lot about, even though Greece is proud to have protected a lot of the Jewish community during World War II by changing sort of the names and the religion on cards, on people's cards. So there has been a history of how the Greek community stood up to, you know, to that sort of era. But it's not something that I was brought up with. And it's been interesting coming to the US at 17 and really thinking about how racism, how bigotry, how hatred, these all intersect. So I want to speak up against anti-Semitism, and I will speak up about it. And I am putting my kids in a school because I know that growing up in an Arab American setting, they will hear a lot of anti-Semitic things, and they need to know what that is and to speak out about it. I am, you know, not someone who has faced anti-Semitism myself, but I, as a Greek, my father was, you know, I mentioned refugee from Greece. Turkey right now, what Erdogan is doing in terms of Hagia Sophia, turning it back into a mosque, is an attack not only on the Orthodox communities of Turkey, it's also on all religious minorities. The Jews of Turkey are leaving in tremendous numbers. So I think we need to think about anti-Semitism both in the US, but also globally, what is happening and where do we create a safe place for anyone to express their religious freedom, but also to feel protected and safe. And it's so sad to me that we have to talk about gun control in the same sentence, but we do. Thank you.
Alan.
This is a serious issue, the rise of anti-Semitism, as we saw with the brutal Tree of Life synagogue killing that happened. Trump has been fostering hatred. The racists, the white supremacists, the anti-Semites are all the same people. I think the way to fight it is we have to build a counter coalition. Again, this is what I've been doing my whole life. We were just mourning the passing of Congressman John Lewis, who was a giant in building reconciliation and healing and in fighting anti-Semitism. I had the honor of hosting him twice at City Year and of working with him to expand the cause of national service. I think that as we're seeing this extraordinary awakening, we have to understand how we take the energy that's in the streets and build an intersectional coalition that will fight racism, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, hatred, bigotry in all its forms. That's what I've been doing my whole life as a movement leader, figuring out how we take grassroots energy and get Congress to move. So that's the leadership I would provide. I'm also strongly opposed to the BDS movement, which I think is fanning these flames. I believe we have to expand programs like Facing History on ourselves and get this into the schools so people understand why this is such a threat. Ultimately, we have to figure out how we build a broader coalition where it's not just people in the Jewish community, but in the civil rights community, in the human rights community, in the gender equality community, the LGBTQ+ community, everyone who is being victimized and marginalized together, saying we're all in this together. And that's what I would try to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Becky.
We have the worst possible person among us as our president, whose rhetoric of hatred has unleashed anti-Semitism in a way that is absolutely disgusting. And we've got to vigorously enforce hate crime legislation and include civics education that is focused on anti-Semitism, histories of genocide around the world in our school curriculum. And yes, Facing History and ourselves, their curricula and their model is one that I think we need to look to and make sure is available and taught around this country, because we have to do everything possible to make sure that anti-Semitism is unacceptable. That starts with our leadership. It starts right from the top. It starts with getting rid of this president, turning the page on him, on his rhetoric of hatred, and then utilizing the tools that we have in education and awareness and curricula to shine a light on a better and more hopeful future.
Ben.
Thank you so much. As the only candidate who's put out a platform on combating anti-Semitism, I've worked on this issue both personally and in my capacity sitting on the boards of CJP and JCRC and AJC and sitting on the Jewish Latino Roundtable at ADL. We need to do several things. Number one is we have to educate our youth that lies, stereotypes, and prejudice about Jews can turn into hate and far worse. We need to teach cultural competency and bias training to our police officers, our teachers, our leaders in our public institutions and private institutions, and to our religious leaders. We need to increase security funding for our religious and cultural institutions. We need to support the No Hates Act and promote and incentivize the collection of data around hate crimes. We also have to pass tougher hate crimes legislation, and once we do, we need to prosecute that. And finally, we need to finally pass the international Holocaust definition of anti-Semitism around the entire world, and not just for the few Western European countries that have done that. This is a global problem and not just the US problem, and we are all in this together in order to combat anti-Semitism.
Thank you. We'll now turn to our fourth question, which will be on Israel. We are deeply concerned about ongoing Republican attempts to use Israel as a political wedge issue in this election to divide Jewish voters. We've seen it before, and while it's never worked in helping Republicans win over a majority of the Jewish vote, we will now no doubt see it again. How do you view President Trump's handling of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and regional security issues, such as unrest in Syria and Iran? We will begin with Jake, followed by Jesse, Natalia, Alan, Becky, Ben, and Dave. Jake.
Well, I would ask what handling? I mean, he basically assigned his son-in-law, who has zero experience whatsoever in foreign policy, to put together a strategic plan that has absolutely failed because the Palestinians weren't even at the table. So this president's incompetence and ignorance about Israel, Iran, the Saudi Arabian Yemeni war, Syria, has cost lives and has damaged America's moral and global standing. One of the great failures of his administration has been to make Israel an increasingly partisan issue, and it must not be. The US-Israel relationship is strongest when it has strong bipartisan consensus in Congress, in both the House of Representatives and in the Senate. And the behavior of this president and some of the actions under Benjamin Netanyahu have exacerbated and damaged that bipartisan consensus. We need to get to a place that we were in under President Obama, where there was a stronger consensus from both parties on the US-Israel relationship for military aid, for economic exchange, and for the promise and the path towards a two-state solution.
Jesse.
There can be no question about the importance of the US-Israeli relationship, and that the joint aspiration and values of our two cultures and our two countries forever binds us together. And what Donald Trump has done to destabilize the path forward for the much needed two-state solution is really detrimental to Israel, to the path for peace, and to the stability of the region, not to mention our standing in the world. It cannot be a partisan issue. It must be something that we are unified on as a country. Israel's security is directly tied to the United States security. There can be no question about that. And Donald Trump, through his lack of experience, his lack of intellectual curiosity, his desire to simply fan the flames of hate and stir up trouble has absolutely been detrimental to the future of the region and again to our standing in the world. And I trust that with President Biden in the White House come January, we'll be on a much better path forward.
Natalia.
So Haley, I've worked at the United Nations for over a decade. I started my career actually in Lebanon, where I learned Arabic and was in charge of economic and social development for the region. I've lived in Pakistan and Turkey. I've traveled a lot of the world, and Israel-Palestine is always top of mind for everyone in the global community. And the US has always been seen as the country that can hopefully bring us to peace. And yet this administration has taken us back so far that it is feeling like we have to start from a much more difficult position when President Biden is elected. And I know that Israel-Palestine is important. It's important to me personally. As I shared, my husband's family is Palestinian Lebanese. It's important though for stability in the region. My family, my parents live in Greece. There's a lot of cooperation between Greece, Israel, Cyprus, for stability in the region. We have seen what is happening with refugees. I've worked on refugee issues for many, many years, including the Syrian refugee issue, but also the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and Jordan. Right now, everybody has lost, all sides. I enter this conversation through a health and human rights conversation as someone who has significant international experience. And I want a solution that will be lasting and sustainable, and one that actually can get us through this, this tragedy for all sides. President Trump has taken us back. I believe that we can move forward with the next administration, but it will require a lot of people with global alliances as well as domestic alliances. Thanks.
Alan. I believe you're still on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. Again, I'm glad you're. This is a very serious issue. Every single president since Harry Truman, when he recognized the state of Israel, has understood two critical things. First, that America is essential to guaranteeing Israel's security. And second, that the parties have to negotiate the peace, but the United States plays an indispensable role as helping to encourage the conditions where they can make the courageous steps for peace. The Trump administration has thrown out both of those because Trump, like with everything else, has tried to make Israel, for the first time since 1948, a partisan wedge issue. And understand, he doesn't care about Israel. Trump only cares about Trump. And he is doing this for his own crass political reasons. We have to fight it across the board and rally. We can't let this happen. I am honored that I've been endorsed by General Stanley McChrystal, by Ambassador, former National Security Advisor Susan Rice, by Michelle Flournoy, former Undersecretary of Defense, by Leon Panetta. They all understand both of these principles. I'm the son of an Iranian doctor who fled a dictatorship in Iran because he wanted to live in a country of freedom. I can't stand the regime in Iran, which is worse than what the Shah was. If I'm elected, I will stand up for Israel. I will stand up to make sure Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. I will send a message to the 70% of Iranians under 30 that actually the United States isn't the great Satan and that we can be a force for peace in the world. Thank you.
Becky.
When I was growing up, the United States-Israel relationship was a nonpartisan issue, and the strong and special relationship between the United States and Israel, which has been long-standing as the cornerstone of peace and security throughout the Middle East, was nonpartisan. And I reject this president's attempts and Republican attempts to politicize this relationship. In order to protect this relationship, we have got to return to our role in the United States as an honest broker advocating for a two-state solution to lasting peace. And as a member of Congress, I'm going to look for opportunities to partner with colleagues across the aisle to demonstrate that when it comes to Israel and the United States-Israel relationship, there is no daylight between us, that Israel has to have the resources, the equipment to defend itself from threats, and that our relationship and our role as that honest broker and working towards the two-state solution is ironclad and is not a partisan issue.
Ben.
Listen, at a time when this president and many others are trying to make Israel a wedge issue and claim that Democrats and progressives don't love Israel, I stand tall and proud to be a progressive, pro-Israel person, because I believe to be progressive is to be pro-Israel. Because if you believe in LGBTQ rights, if you believe in women's rights, if you believe in the advancement of technology and science, then that's, in order to improve the human condition, that is entirely what Israel is about. So we as pro-Israel Democrats need to stand tall and proud and own this mantle and not step back and say we don't love Israel, because it's not true, because I love it tremendously. I have visited it over 50 different times. So this is very personal, and I have met my wife when I studied abroad at Hebrew University. We can't allow this to be a wedge issue, because it's in the best interest of the United States, for economic reasons, for democracy reasons, and freedom and justice and national security reasons, and economic reasons, and for community reasons, because we have so many, over 30,000 Israelis living in Massachusetts that are part and parcel of our community and our economy. We must protect and show that we are all friends of Israel, because it's in the best interest of the United States.
Dave.
So I'm the person here who was in the Obama White House and has the support of Ben Rhodes in this race, who helped hammer out the Iran deal. And I'm proud to be one of the few candidates with a J Street pre-endorsement, because I believe in a Jewish and democratic state of Israel and recognize a two-state solution is the only path to a stable, lasting peace in the region. It's not even that I disagree with the Trump administration's policy here. They don't seem to have one. That peace plan would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. So what exactly is the Trump administration's strategy in Iran? Does the president even know? I don't think so. We need to repeal the authorization of the use of military force and prevent a war of choice in Iran. I also believe that a nuclear-armed Iran remains the single biggest existential threat to the state of Israel. So that's why I support the complete and unobstructed implementation of the JCPOA to block Iran's path to a nuclear weapon. And I think President Trump's abandonment of the JCPOA with no alternative, no apparent strategy to prevent Iran from restarting their nuclear program was a terrible miscalculation, moreover, a betrayal of our own allies and members of the Israeli security establishment. We need to elect Joe Biden as president, and we need a member of Congress who is ready on day one to work with him to protect Israel, prevent a nuclear Iran, and achieve peace in the region. I am.
Jake.
I started this.
Got it. Okay, great. Well, then we will, I just want to make sure, did everyone get a chance to answer this question? I believe so. Okay, great. So we are now going to transition to a speed round. So we will ask 2 yes or no questions, and we just ask that you please answer yes or no. We will start with the following. Do you support the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed under the Obama administration, giving Israel $3.3 billion in security assistance and $500 million annually in missile defense for the next 10 years without conditions? To put a finer point on it, do you support any cutting or conditioning of security aid to Israel? So the question is, do you support the MOU? The second question is, do you support cutting or conditioning of aid to Israel? So, Jesse.
I haven't read the MOU. No to conditions, yes to clarity.
Natalia.
Yes and no.
Alan.
Yes, I strongly support the MOU, and no, I do not support putting conditions on aid to Israel.
Becky.
Yes and no.
Ben.
Absolutely yes on the MOU, and absolutely not on conditions.
Dave.
Was in the Obama White House and read the MOU, so yes, I support it, and no on conditions.
Jake.
Yes on the MOU, no on the conditions.
Great. Our second question. This is just one question. Do you support the United States rejoining the Iran nuclear agreement, or JCPOA? We'll go in the same order. Jesse.
Yes.
Natalia.
Absolutely, yes.
Alan.
Yes.
Becky.
Yes.
Ben.
No, not as the original JCPOA.
Dave.
Yes, definitely.
Jake.
Yes, but some of the provisions have sunsetted, so we're going to have to negotiate it again because it's expiring part of the provisions. But yes, I support the JCPOA when it was first announced.
Great. Okay, we will now move to audience questions, and we want to thank all the audience members who sent in their questions. We have received so many great questions that we are going to cut the answers time down to 1 minute. So let's aim for brevity here, and the shorter we are, the more questions we can get in. Our first question comes from Scott. And it's actually 2 questions. If elected, what would be your first choice of committee assignments and why? And 2, which currently serving member of Congress do you most admire and why? We will start with Natalia.
So right now, given the COVID crisis, I would want to join the special committee that's dealing with the COVID crisis. I assume that in January it'll still be in place, and that would be where my skills would be most useful as an epidemiologist, as someone who knows what we have to do in order to reopen safely our schools, our businesses, and just get us on the right path and get us out of this disaster. In terms of Congresswomen, let's say that I am biased there. Ayanna Pressley. I mean, she is a Black woman. I feel like she has spoken strongly around racial justice, an issue that I care about deeply around racism in health. She is loud and clear on her values, on who she's representing, and she is pretty amazing. So, yeah.
Alan.
On committees, I would try to serve on the Health, Education, Labor Committee because I want to advance the cause of national service, healthcare for all, labor reform to make sure we can have unions again, and fighting poverty, etc. These have been issues I'm working on my entire career. On the second one, I'd like to be on the Armed Services Committee. Mentors of mine, including Senator Gary Hart, Senator Sam Nunn, Leon Panetta, General Stan McChrystal, Susan Rice, Michelle Flourney, etc., have taught me that Democrats have to understand defense so that we can make sure we have strong security, align our priorities correctly, not keep fighting the last war and the endless wars in the Middle East, look at new threats like cyber, understand that the security threats of the future are pandemics, climate change, migration, global poverty. So I would try hard to serve on that committee as well.
And which member of Congress do you admire?
Oh, sorry. I mentioned John Lewis, I just have to say, who I did have a chance to work with. I think he's an extraordinary role model, a giant of our times. And I would do everything I can to try to continue his extraordinary legacy of fighting for racial justice, fighting anti-Semitism, and trying to heal the country, and also getting in good trouble.
Thank you. Becky.
In terms of committee assignments, I'd like to serve on the Small Business Committee. But there's a 5 times differential in annual median household income from the north to the south part of this district, and that is not okay. It is a microcosm of the economic inequality taking place all over this country. I made an early commitment in this race, if I'm so fortunate as to be elected, to have a member of my staff whose priority focus is economic development, especially in the southern part of the district, in the South Coast and our gateway cities. And I believe that small business development and investing in them is a path to economic vitality, inclusive economic prosperity, and particularly making sure that small business entrepreneurs who typically have had the hardest time getting access to capital, including minorities, women, veterans, and the disabled, have that access to capital, and that we're supporting them in getting those businesses off the ground. As for a member of Congress that I admire, Congresswoman Katherine Clark. And the reason that I mention her is she's somebody who I believe has led with empathy and openness and warmth. I admire that. And So I'll stop there. I see I'm out of time. Thank you.
Ben.
Thank you so much. Look, the two most powerful committees are Ways and Means and Appropriations. If you want to talk about taxing and spending, healthcare and Social Security, those are the ones that I want to be on in order to bring back the most influence I can back to our district. There isn't one member of Congress that I can tell you as a whole that I most admire. There are three current and one former. Ted Deutsch, Cory Booker, and Nita Lowey, although she's retiring so soon. And I am personally biased because I worked for Martin Frost when he was chairman of the DCCC and chairman of the Democratic Caucus. And we worked together because he had led over 30 different missions to Israel while he was in those roles as the dean of the Texas delegation. So I was so proud to see him in that role and so proud to be a part of what he's done for the Jewish community and for the Democratic Party.
Dave.
Well, the Committee on Government Oversight and Reform. We need watchdogs back in Congress who know how to hold people accountable, whether it's ExxonMobil or a president who's totally out of control. One of my top issues is the opioid crisis. In the AG's office, I helped put Purdue Pharma out of business for making OxyContin. And I made a promise to families on the South Coast who had buried their children because of this crisis that I would help end the opioid crisis once and for all when I got to Congress. You can go to my website and see the comprehensive plan that's on there for exactly how I would do just that. As for a member of Congress that I deeply admire, there's a lot, but Elizabeth Warren comes to mind. Again, I was the first here to endorse a presidential candidate, and I endorsed her because she has a plan for that on just about every issue under the sun. And she doesn't go to Congress and didn't run for office because she wanted to have her job. She wants to do it every single day. That's the same reason that I got into public service, and it's why I'm running for Congress. It's what people in the 4th Congressional District deserve.
Jake.
Before I speak, I think we're all seeing that we've got racist, anti-Semitic language in the panelist, Linda Cohen. I would ask that we remove her and take down that name. Unfortunately, a reminder of how much work we have to do. Sorry. So the two committees that I put forward, people always remind me how hard it is for freshmen to get on them, but hey, a kid can dream. Energy and Commerce and Intelligence. Energy and Commerce is what Representative Kennedy is on right now. Tremendously important committee for economic development. And I've already put forward a life sciences manufacturing plan with union leaders, business leaders, scientific leaders that will create jobs in the South Coast. Part of why I've earned such strong support from Representative Carol Fiola, Representative Pat Haddad, Representative Paul Schmid, the strongest support of any candidate in this race in the South Coast, because they know I'm going to be a champion for economic recovery. And energy and commerce is a great way to do that. Second, intelligence. We have spent 19 years and $6 trillion and countless lives on failed forever wars overseas. I'm a veteran of one of those wars, and we need to start asking much tougher questions to prevent a future war of choice. And then finally, who do I admire? Who would I call up for advice? I was going to say Catherine Clark. She's still my number one, but because Becky said her, I'll also give you my runner-up, which is Jim McGovern. What I admire about Jim is two things. One, he has been focused on food insecurity for 20 years, and he's been awesome at it. And I admire that focus. And two, his constituents in his district love him, and they know that he's going to fight for them.
Thank you, Jesse.
Well, I just want to echo my disgust at what we just saw in the comments. My two committees would be Energy and Commerce and Transportation. Energy and Commerce, because as the former head of external affairs at Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts, and at a time when reproductive justice is under serious attack, Energy and Commerce would be the committee that dealt with any legislation around codifying Roe in federal law or protecting reproductive justice. And I would want to be at the center of that and use my expertise to advance those issues. Transportation, clearly a huge issue around Massachusetts, but particularly in this district, major opportunities to create economic growth and to tackle our climate crisis. I've spent 5 years on the Executive Committee of Transportation for Massachusetts and on the state's Regional Rail Vision Committee. I'd want to do that work. I also, I deeply admire Ayanna Pressley, who's endorsed me in this race. That's the easy answer. But Catherine Clark and I have worked together for years, dating back to my time at Mass Women's Political Caucus and Planned Parenthood. I think so highly of her focus on everything from domestic violence to early education and care, and admire her deeply.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Ben. What are your plans for addressing the current climate crisis? We will start with Alan, followed by Becky, Ben, Dave, Jake, Jesse, Natalia. Alan.
Thank you for asking. This is real. Our children are scared. Right after I got in the race, I was walking our dog Zuzu with my son Reese, who was 11 at the time. And he turned to me and he said, "Dad, I'm really afraid." And so I stopped and looked him in the eye and I said, "Reese, what are you afraid of?" He said, "We're killing the planet. There's so much pollution. There's climate change. It's not going to be here for me and my kids." And so I said to him, "Reese, that's why your mom and I supported you and your big sister when you wanted to walk out of school as part of Sunrise. It's why I'm running for Congress. It's not too late." Now, the happy ending of that story is during this crisis, my son Reese has started with his friends a nonprofit called New Generation, New Planet, trying to encourage people to take the action we're taking now, use Zoom, etc. I strongly support the Green New Deal. I strongly support putting a price on carbon. I strongly support rejoining the Paris Climate Accords. But the difference that I will do is I will work to build a coalition, as I did in helping to build and save AmeriCorps. I want to bring together Sunrise and 350.org and the Sierra Club and NRDC and the League of Conservation Voters and leaders like Secretary Kerry and Al Gore and say, let's work together to seize this moment, build a coalition, an agenda we can agree on, and force the Congress to do the people's will. Thank you.
Becky.
I wake up every day with deep concern about the future we're leaving, not just for my kids, but for all of our kids and the generations to come. Early on in this race, when the first youth climate strike was happening in Boston, I had the occasion to speak with a group of high school students who were on their way down. And when asking them what motivated them to come that day, one young woman said to me, "What's the point of getting an education if we're not going to have a planet to live on?" And I have to say, that really stayed with me. We are hurtling toward a future where the everyday realities of climate change will overshadow everything else, on top of the climate emergency, which we know has already arrived. And that's why I strongly support the Green New Deal and mobilizing our federal resources to decarbonize our economy, put millions of people back to work with good paying green jobs, invest in a massive infrastructure package and in our public transit systems, and put environmental justice front and center to protect the most vulnerable among us.
Ben.
Thank you. Well, look, we all know the climate crisis is the existential threat to our communities, to our planet, to our countries. So one of the first things I want to do is create an environmental lens office similar to the Congressional Budget Office, where every piece of legislation is looked through a lens of how does it affect the environment. We need to do that. We also know that not one solution is going to fit all. We need to move away from fossil fuels. We need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We need to re-enter the Paris Accords. We need to reinvest in renewable energies, especially in solar and water. And we need to make sure that we combine our housing and our transportation with our environment. 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from our transportation. So let's upgrade and modernize that. And finally, we need to create a clean energy economy and give people the skills and the training in order to move into that economy. If we do all of this together, we can really make a difference, not just for my 4 kids, but for all children of our generation and generations to come.
Dave.
So we've kicked the can down the road so long on this issue that we've run out of road. Will the young people watching this forum be able to breathe the air and drink the water or not? So look, I'm the one that's helped investigate ExxonMobil in the AG's office and sue the Trump EPA. One of the first things I'll do is vote for the Green New Deal. It meets the moment. It's intersectional. Half of my 4th graders had asthma because of environmental racism, because we've been polluting communities of color by design. We need to decarbonize transportation, the leading cause of emissions, finish South Coast Rail, make public colleges and universities tuition free, make Fall River the leader in Atlantic offshore wind, pass a Blue New Deal for our oceans, and recognize there are 50,000 coal jobs left in this whole country and 110,000 clean energy jobs in Massachusetts alone. Also, I'm not taking a dime from fossil fuel executives, and I'm not being supported by a super PAC. I wish I could say that about everyone here. I'm ready to get dark money out of politics. I'm ready to stand up to fossil fuel companies, and I'm ready to save this planet.
Jake.
There's a deeper issue that connects the climate change crisis we're confronting with the public health crisis that we're confronting, and that is the increasing disdain for science from our leaders in Washington, D.C. I was raised in a family of scientists. I was taught to value empiricism. I was taught to take seriously expertise. And too often in the rhetoric that we hear from politicians, it's as though having a degree makes you somehow not representative of the people, and how dare you speak. We have got to get rid of that mentality. We have got to start putting science back on a pedestal and listening to experts. We need to introduce carbon pricing because we know it's going to work to get to carbon neutrality. And we need to use a Green New Deal to reinvent transportation in Massachusetts. I've worked on this issue in the private sector. I've worked on this issue in the public sector. And I've been so effective that I've earned the support of the leading environmental advocates in my hometown of Newton, including Marcia Cooper. And I'm going to be a champion for a Green New Deal and a green economic recovery in Congress.
Jesse.
The economic crisis that's tied to the climate crisis, the public health crisis tied to it, the racial justice crisis tied to it. We have to tackle all of those. And you ask what my plan is for tackling the climate crisis. It is to keep doing the work that I've been at the center of for years now, whether it was on the local level at the select board, leading with remarkable local activists to tackle this issue to earn green communities status and ban plastic bags and styrofoam, in the governor's office where we led the nation on investing in clean energy, or running the state's progressive business organization where we fought for carbon pricing, the Transit Climate Initiative, and increasing the renewable portfolio standard. I'm going to go to Washington to build on a track record of fighting for climate and fighting for clean air, clean water, and clean land, pass a Green New Deal, advance responsible offshore wind development, and make sure that we are centering racial justice, environmental justice throughout. I'm proud of my track record around climate change and tackling this crisis, and I'm looking forward to going to Washington to build on it.
Natalia.
Haley, the climate emergency requires global leadership. We cannot solve it in Massachusetts. We cannot solve it in District 4. We cannot solve it in the US alone. We have to have strong global solidarity around this movement. I'm the only candidate here who has worked on this issue at the global level. I led the UN Development Program's work on climate and health. I met with ministers of Tunisia who told me that they can't get rid of fossil fuel subsidies because their poor would really be out on the streets and they'd be in trouble. I met with the Minister of Health of Fiji who asked me what they can do for their hospitals because they were so worried about the seawater rise. I know that this is an existential crisis for future generations, but also current generations. I will fight for the Green New Deal. I will fight for mass public transportation, which can be a triple win for our health, our environment, and our economy. I will fight for green energy, and I have been on those conversations. I know these are difficult conversations, but we cannot wait. My biggest worry, Haley, is that COVID will distract us. As a public health expert, I would say we have to solve this together. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned, we received quite a few questions. As noted, sadly, we did have to close the chat due to some vitriolic hate speech that appeared on our chat. So we've closed the chat, but that doesn't mean we have a shortage of questions. So I'm going to combine two now, which are both related to the district. The first is from Chloe. What would you do to address wealth inequity within the 4th district? And Shira, what will you do to make public transportation accessible to all residents of our district? And will you support the development of the South Coast Rail? So for this question, we will start with Becky.
Well, I'll start with the second part first, which is an easy absolutely yes to the South Coast Rail and the importance of investing in transportation and infrastructure in this district. I mentioned earlier that there's a 5-to-1 differential in annual median household income from the north to the south part of this district. That was true before COVID-19, and it's only more exacerbated in the times that we are in right now. And I mentioned my commitment to having a member of my staff whose priority focus is economic development in the South Coast, in the gateway cities, and in those parts of our district that have been struggling the most to come back from the 2008 recession and are most vulnerable right now. But I also want to mention childcare and the need for childcare to be more accessible and affordable. Working families are feeling that pinch every day. The lack of investment that our federal government has made in childcare, which has been front and center in this time of pandemic, is a statement of values for this government that has to change.
Ben.
Thank you so much. On the second question, absolutely support of South Coast Rail. 20% of Fall River don't own a vehicle and need public transportation in order to get to hubs of employment. We need to make that efficient, affordable, and we can do it in a way in combating the climate crisis. We need to make sure our public transportation is for everyone and not just the wealthiest in our community. In terms of the wealth and equality piece, there are several places we can attack on this. It starts with education and universal preschool for all 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, because we know the earlier someone reads and writes, the more likely they're going to be successful in life. We need to make sure higher education is accessible and affordable, and student debt isn't the burden on someone choosing what kind of industry they want to go into. We need to increase the earned income tax credit. We need a $15 minimum wage, and we need to have free adult vocational education to give people the skills and the training to move into jobs and into new industries to increase and lift their standard of living.
Well, 100% support South Coast Rail. I mentioned it before. Fall River and Taunton are the biggest cities within 50 miles of Boston without commuter rail access. Transportation is one of the biggest issues we face. Our traffic nightmare is going to come roaring back when our COVID nightmare is over, unless we make a better choice. So I released a transportation plan that addresses this comprehensively. You can go on my website and check that out. Income inequality is an intersectional failure. It's related to systemic racism, but it's also related to decades of failed policy. You know, affordable housing and redlining. Where is the rent relief? Why haven't we asked the wealthiest families in America to pay a little bit more so that we can reduce rents, as Elizabeth Warren has called for? Why have we been underinvesting in education and school systems for decades? What about student loan debt? You know, we're bankrupting a generation, including me and my wife, we're in $300,000 of student loan debt. Income inequality is why I got into politics. It's what I saw every day in the South Bronx, and it's what I'm going to work on every day in Congress.
Jake.
Well, I know you're not supposed to say these in these candidate forums, but I actually agree with what a lot of Ben said there, listed off the EITC, early education, retraining, and I won't go into all of them. I think they're good policies. The devil, of course, is in the details. How do you actually get these things done? I'll focus on 2 of them. One is jobs, and the second is transportation. One of the reasons I got the first union endorsement in this race and have continued to build strong union support, as well as strong support from the South Coast, where unemployment is north of 20% in parts of Taunton and Fall River, is because I've put forward concrete plans for us to create jobs. One example is a life sciences manufacturing plan, working with state elected officials, with business leaders, with union leaders, with local elected officials, to put a roadmap out there about how we can create good, high-paying jobs that do or do not require advanced degrees, that pay 6 figures, and that have a high demand far into the future. And then secondly, transportation. We need a new Eisenhower plan, not for highways, but for public transportation, all electric regional rail, bus rapid transit, better infrastructure for cycling and walking. Not stuff that's necessarily glamorous to talk about, but boy, it really, really works to be an engine of economic opportunity and equity.
Jesse.
Haley, you're so right to combine a question about equity and transportation. The single biggest determinant of whether or not someone can be upwardly mobile is their access to transportation and their commute time. So we can't talk about equity without talking about transportation. I'm proud to have been deeply involved in this issue for a long time, including serving on the state's Regional Rail Vision Commission that recommended that we move forward with South Coast Rail immediately and not in phases. I'm a big supporter. We also need to look at the ways in which we're investing in regional transit authorities in the southern part of this district, the one that serves Taunton and Attleboro and another that serves Fall River and outside of the district in New Bedford. They get 25% of their funding from the federal government, and they need better funding and more reliable service. There are so many things we have to do to tackle inequity. I want to lift up one issue: paid family and medical leave. I was on the 8-person team that negotiated that law here in Massachusetts. It took 7 months. We didn't even agree on the problem we were tackling on day one, but we put in the work, rolled up our sleeves, went through a whole bunch of boxes of Joe and Munchkins, and we came out of that room with the strongest paid family medical leave law in the country, one that lifts up working families and tackles inequity. That's the type of work I'm going to go to Washington to fight for in this district.
Natalia.
So I'm a big supporter of the South Coast Rail, agree with what a lot of the candidates have said. It is both an economic reason, there's a health reason in terms of air pollution and mobility, reducing obesity, as well as obviously the climate reason. So let me turn to the other question, which was on wealth inequities. And there's a difference between income inequality and wealth inequality. And I think it's important to highlight that. Wealth inequities are in large part a legacy of our racist policies around redlining and the fact that a lot of families were not able to own homes. So I think we have to have solutions that are systemic. We need to think about housing. We need to think about ensuring that families aren't spending 30, 40, 50% of their income on housing. But as a public health official, I would be remiss to not mention that 500,000 American families annually file for bankruptcy because of medical related costs. If we solve our problem and push for Medicare for all, we will have done something around the impact of wealth income inequality. Of course, that can only be solved through taxation, reform to our tax policy, through ambitious policies around reparations, but we can do something about how this wealth inequality is impacting daily lives of Americans. Thanks.
Alan.
Again, going last, I agree with what many of my fellow candidates have said. I'm strongly for South Coast Rail. I also believe we're entering a New Deal moment because of the multiple crises. And so I have a big, what I think is a New Deal idea. It's called Restore the Dream Accounts. Here's how it would work. And this will get at the wealth inequality issue. For every child born in America, I want to have the federal government invest $15,000 in a children's savings account, similar to a 529 account, paid for by the estate tax, asking the wealthiest Americans who benefit the most to put up this money. By the time that child's 19, just through very average, moderate, safe returns, that's worth $50,000. Here's the deal I want to make. You can use that money for college expenses, for job training, to be a small business or not-for-profit entrepreneur the way I was after school, for your first down payment on a home, and for emergencies. Half this country is $500 away from an emergency. The emergencies hit, and we have lines for food banks and people starving at risk of eviction. You just have to do 1 year of national service, and you get a dream account of $50,000. I think if we did that, we could help solve the inequality problem, or wealth problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our final audience question comes from Julian. A key Jewish value is tikkun olam, or healing the world. How have you embodied tikkun olam in your career? And how will you live this value if elected to Congress? We will start with Ben.
Thank you so much. I have sat on the boards of nonprofits and committees of over 12 different nonprofits and boards in the Jewish community and the Latino community, AJC, CJP. I have sat on the board of JCRC, The Joint. I've sat on the board of the Jewish Teen Foundation of Greater Boston, the New England Israel Business Council, and plenty of others. I'm the president of the Hispanic National Bar Association of all New England and would be the first Latino ever elected to Congress from Massachusetts. I have been charged every night by working on these nonprofit boards. It's why over 180 community leaders have endorsed my candidacy, because they know at my heart is amplifying the voices of the everyday citizens to lift them up, because we are only as strong as the most vulnerable in our community. I've done that in the Jewish community. I've done that in the Latino community. I created the first Jewish Latino national task force for young adults in the country. I created the first Jewish Muslim task force for young adults in this country. It's something that is at me every day. As much as I love to be a lawyer, what put me to sleep at night was giving back to the community, for me, for my children, and to strengthen the community as a whole.
Dave.
Well, I mentioned tikkun olam before because I did learn this from my rabbis and from my family. As I said, my father had been in Mississippi in the Freedom Summer in '64, and he was lamenting that every summer wasn't considered the Freedom Summer. This is why I chose public service. This is why I helped run Gift of Life donations when I was in college. And I actually got the call about 5-6 years ago to be a bone marrow donor and to sign up in that organization to give somebody the gift of life by donating bone marrow. And this is why every stage in my career, I've decided to stay in public service. You know, when I left law school and went to the Obama White House, I could have left and gone to a business group. I didn't. I went to the Attorney General's office. I wanted to do this work. I wanted to participate in tikkun olam. I wanted to repair the world. Yeah, I sit on all the boards as well. Yeah, I've been involved. But day to day, what I choose to do is fight for you, to fight for these values that as progressive Jews, we all believe in. That's why I'm running for Congress.
Jake.
When I came home from the Marines, I had to figure out what I was going to do next. Was it going to be business or continued public service? And I found a really nice path where I was able to work in the private sector and still serve my hometown of Newton in the evenings and weekends as a city councilor. And that work as a city councilor I found to be a tremendous training ground for how to think about public service more broadly. The thing about local politics and local governance is that rhetoric really can't get you that far. At the end of the day, people are going to stop you when you're walking your dog or stop you in the grocery store and say, I want the road paved, I want the trash taken out, I want the school built. You got to get stuff done. And that spirit of being solution oriented is what I will take with me to Congress. I will work together to get results for the people of the Massachusetts 4th, because for too long, Washington has failed us. The last thing I'll say, growing up in a family of scientists, is that an important way that we heal the world is to promote science. Science has given us vaccines. Science has cured disease. And we need to invest in basic research and in the life sciences sector here in Massachusetts so that we can continue to do that.
Jessie.
When I interviewed to go work for Governor Patrick, it was December of 2012, and I was in his house, and he asked me, how do I make big decisions? And I said, I do what I think would make my late grandmother proud. And he said, well, what does that mean? And I said, would it heal the world? The values that my grandmother and my grandfather instilled in me, the values of Tikkun Olam, are what have guided every decision I've made in my career. It's why I've frankly never had a for-profit job in my life. All of my work has been in the nonprofit and government space. It's why I worked at Planned Parenthood fighting to make sure that our immigrant community had access to reproductive health care. It's why I ran the Mass Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired so that our blind and visually impaired seniors could stay safe and independent at home. It's why I've been on the front lines fighting for paid leave and to raise the minimum wage, for earned sick time, to equitably raise revenue, to invest in housing or transportation. This has been the guiding force of my life, and I am so grateful to my grandmother. You can't see her pictures on the wall behind me, for instilling it in me, and it will be the guiding force of my work in Congress.
Natalia.
So I didn't know the term Tikkun Olam, but I'm grateful for learning it. At 19, I went to the border of Afghanistan to work with an indigenous tribe to bring health and education. At 20, I worked at an Iraqi refugee camp in Greece. At 24, I joined the United Nations, and I spent most of my career working on poverty alleviation, working on gender equality in the Middle East, working on climate change and bringing solar panels to clinics in Zimbabwe. Why did I leave the global scene to enter US politics? It's because I have seen the US under the Trump administration pull out of the Paris Agreement, now pull back out of the WHO, retreat on LGBT rights globally, put the global gag rule in place. And I am embarrassed. I am embarrassed to be an American working in the United Nations when we have to solve these issues back home. So I'm running for Congress with a unique profile, having had a career trying to heal the world, but recognizing that if we don't do something here in the US, in Massachusetts, we can no longer claim that place as leaders in the global scene.
Alan.
Again, I love this question. So I did not grow up in a Jewish home, but I grew up in a home practicing Tikkun Olam. As I mentioned, both of my parents were healers. My mother was a nurse, my father was a doctor. My mom was the wisest person I've ever known. She taught me the most important thing I've ever learned. She said, Alan, every single person has a special gift to give. And the way you bring that out is by loving them. My dad taught me that the ideals of this country are why its greatest strength of liberty, democracy, equality of opportunity, and most of all, justice. I started sitting with my friends basically to give everyone a chance to practice Tikkun Olam, to discover their gifts and spread more love. We fought for City to be the model for America. I fought to save it when it was under attack and to grow it. 1.1 million Americans have now given 1.7 billion hours practicing Tikkun Olam. This will be a fundamental value for me. It is in my life. I embrace it, I love it. We need more of that now. It's essential that we all work to heal the world, especially post this terrible administration. Thank you.
Becky.
Tikkun Olam is the guiding value of my life and why I'm in this fight. I talk a lot in this campaign about being a mom. I also have been inspired by my own mom. When I was a kid, when I was 9, now my daughter's age, the powers that be in the community I grew up in wanted to see an incinerator put in our community. And my mother, who had never been politically active before, gathered together with neighbors and friends, stood up and said, there's no way we're letting anybody breathe in what that incinerator's putting out. And they fought back, got organized, and won. And that taught me what a group of passionate, committed citizens can do when they put their mind to it. In 2016, after Donald Trump was elected, I, like so many others, said to myself, I want to do more. What's it going to be? And for me, it was running for office. As a Newton City Councilor, I have found that to be incredibly meaningful and impactful in going to work, fighting for our families, their future, our kids, and the long-term best interest. That's why I got in that fight for City Council. That's why I'm in this fight now, and why I feel that Tikkun Olam is going to continue guiding my values and the values that I instill in my children throughout our lives.
Thank you all for your answers to both our questions and the audience questions. We will now move to 1-minute closing statements, starting with Dave.
Well, thank you so much again, JDCA and all the other co-candidates for joining, and all of you for watching. Yesterday was the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. That act has transformed millions of Americans' lives in this country, including people who are hearing impaired, like Leslie, who asked the first question in the chat today. That's what public service at its best can be about. If you want somebody who will fight every single day for Jewish progressive values and to uphold and advance the legacy of this seat, I think this is the campaign for you. I'm the only candidate who has put out a pledge disavowing dark money and super PAC money, and I call again on my co-candidates. Join me. I'm committed to traveling offices so that we can take the services of this office on the road and into communities. I call again on my co-candidates. Join me. From the first day I launched this race, my campaign has been not just in English, but in Spanish and Portuguese as well. You need to talk to everyone if you're going to represent everyone. Go to davecavell.com. Join a movement that can't be bought. Thank you so much, everyone.
Jake.
I'm a Marine veteran. I'm a city councilor. I'm a new dad. And I'm the great-grandson of refugees from the Russian pogroms and the grandson of a poor, skinny Jewish kid who walked into a Marine recruiting office. I'm standing here because the US government took a chance on that kid, allowed him to achieve the American dream. And yet, under Donald Trump, the best parts of America, the better angels of our nature, have come crashing down. We need a leader who can lead in crisis. We need to stand up to Donald Trump's dangerous and hateful agenda. I have built a full district campaign of business leaders, of union leaders, of South Coast elected officials, and of Northern elected officials, because they know that I'm the person who can go to Congress and deliver results for the people of the Massachusetts 4th and to lead on the day after we kick Donald Trump out of office.
Jesse.
Well, thank you so much to the JDCA and for all of you for joining. I know no one needs more Zoom calls in your life, so everyone's kind to take some time on a Sunday afternoon. You know, I am incredibly proud of my Jewish heritage. I am incredibly proud to have stayed close to that by earning the support as a pre-primary approved candidate for J Street, by serving on the council for JCRC, by traveling to Israel in recent years. I never could have imagined when I announced this campaign in Fall River back in October that the fights of my life, the fights for equity and opportunity, would be as important today, even more important today than they were last fall. But because of a global pandemic, because of the mismanagement coming out of the White House, we are in an entirely different place. I believe that I'm the candidate with the values, the vision, the experience, and the team to lead an equitable recovery to COVID-19, to fight for a healthcare system that works for everyone and reproductive justice, to stand up to Donald Trump, and to live the values that my grandmother instilled in me as a child when I go to Congress and fight for the entire 4th Congressional District. I'm grateful for your opportunity, and I hope to earn your vote.
Natalie.
Thank you so much for having me in this debate. And under usual circumstances, you probably wouldn't see me on this panel, but we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and I'm an epidemiologist. I'm uniquely qualified with the skills to serve in a Congress that will be deciding on how vaccine is developed and rolled out, how our schools can open safely, how we ensure that our workers and our families are able to enter the economy again without putting their lives at risk. We need public health experts, and right now there are only 14 scientists in Congress, one with a doctorate in public health. We need more than that to get us back on our path to recovery. And I am the only candidate who can bring that expertise to the table. I'm a mom of 3-year-old twins. Really, I would not be running if I didn't think that I had a unique skill set and if it didn't feel urgent. It feels urgent because if we don't solve COVID in the world, at the federal level, nobody across our district is going to be safe. So I'm here to serve. I'm here to bring my unique expertise to the table, and I hope I have earned your vote tonight.
Alan.
We're living, as we all know, in an unprecedented time with 3 multiple crises happening at once: the healthcare crisis from COVID, the resulting economic crisis, and now the racial justice crisis. But the good news to me is how the American people are responding, from our healthcare workers to other essential workers to now more than 30 million Americans that have joined arm in arm to say we must take on our history of racism. 30 years ago, when I started sitting with my friends, we said we had to do this differently. We couldn't do the same old thing to fix our schools or to fight poverty or preserve our environment. There are plenty of lawyers and legislators and lobbyists in Congress. I think we need more movement leaders. That's what I've tried to be. I figured out how to tap the energy that we're seeing in our streets and use it to break open the doors of Congress and get the will of the people in. If I get elected, I don't want to go alone. I want to bring all of you with me. One of the first things I will do is reach out to JDCA and say, can we do another Zoom call only to talk about all the issues we've talked about? What I love about your agenda is you just don't want to fight for Israel. You care about racial justice and health care and economic justice, etc. So I'd love to have your support. I'd love to work with you. And together, we can get the people's will done. Thank you.
Becky.
I'm running for Congress with the fierce urgency of a mom fed up by what is going on in this country and determined to make change. I wake up every day thinking about the future we're leaving for our kids and how we are going to safeguard that future. That is why I won't stand for the NRA threatening our kids' safety at school or our communities. That's why I won't stand for big drug companies ripping off people like my mom who rely on life-saving medication. That's why I won't stand for big oil putting our planet in peril. I'm especially proud to be running for Congress at a time when out of 435 members, we only have 25 who are mothers of school-aged children. Imagine what we could get done if we had 100 or 250 moms of young kids in Congress. That is a perspective that is missing and needed, that I'm proud to offer. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to spend time with you this afternoon and ask for your vote.
Ben.
Yes, thank you so much again to the Jewish Democratic Council of America for hosting tonight. And again, it's been wonderful to be in this virtual platform with everyone. We need now more than ever to elect the most progressive pro-Israel Democrat that we can in order to combat the anti-Semitism and anti-Israel rhetoric that we're seeing both from the far left and from the far right. I have for the last 20 years been fighting that, supporting and protecting and strengthening the Jewish community here and abroad, and I will continue doing that as your next member of Congress. If the Jewish and the pro-Israel community does not galvanize around one candidate at this time, it could be disastrous for our community. So if being pro-Israel and if supporting the Jewish community is important to you, then I ask you to go to bensigelforcongress.com and follow our movement. Be a part of who we are, and I ask for your vote, not just on September 1st, but early voting from August 22nd to the 28th or by mail.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our forum, and I will turn it over to JDCA Political Chair Izzy Klein to wrap up.
Great. Thank you, Haley, for moderating. Thank you to Jake, Dave, Becky, Alan, Natalia, Jesse, and Ben for joining us tonight. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. You know, we saw firsthand today why the voice of Jewish Dems is so important to battle hate online and beyond. But we also heard from an outstanding group of leaders in Massachusetts who will help us to foster a better, stronger, and more just future for our country. As a reminder, early voting is available by mail and in person to all registered voters. No excuse is required. In-person early voting will begin on August 22nd and end on August 28th. Primary day is September 1st. We hope that after tonight, you are energized to support our candidate, your candidate of choosing. Get involved and vote in this critically important election. JDCA has some great opportunities to engage in the coming weeks and months. So to ensure Democrats are elected in November, please check out our website, jewishdems.org. We invite you to join our weekly national phone banks and text banks. We'll be calling and texting in swing states every Tuesday and Wednesday from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Tomorrow, we'll be joined by Alcee Hastings, Congressman from Florida, as we honor the life and legacy of John Lewis. And please join us on August 13th at 5 p.m. for a very special JDCA event before the Democratic National Convention. You can sign up on our website, jewishdems.org, under events. Thank you again. Stay safe, vote, and we look forward to working with you to elect Democrats across the country in November. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe and healthy.
You know,